Hello, founders. Welcome to Startups.com. We are live, coming to you every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. As I put on repeat all the time because it's that exciting. Every Tuesday, we do pitch decks. Every Wednesday, traction hacking, revenue acceleration. And then Thursdays, we answer a lot of the most popular questions and topics. We compile them all around the interwebs, especially from our community at Startups.com. Thank you so much if you're joining us from Startups.com. I have the always exciting, venerable, the expert in so many different things, but insightful and ready to share, Will with us. And Will is a 9-time founder, 5 exits, as well as the founder and CEO of Startups.com. If you have not met him and you're part of the community, make sure you say hi. Will, give us a little bit of a qualification. We kind of did this with Ryan. Requalify yourself in terms of what brings you here and why startups and what gives you the
Who are
audacity
you?
to.
Who
Yeah,
am I?
exactly.
Yeah, I was talking to a founder today. Today I do office hours, and I, doing a bunch of calls back to back. And one of the founders was talking about the last 2 years. They've been working like crazy. It's a really, really smart founder, and they were saying how the last 2 years have been just absolutely insane building a startup. And I said, cool. Take exactly what you just did for the last 2 years and spread it out across 31 years, and that's been my life. He's like, how are you still alive? I was like, I don't know, man. I don't know. But to answer your question, like I've been nothing but a startup founder for 31 years. And in that time, I've seen everything. I've seen everything you could possibly imagine, both in my own startups as well as helping people with theirs. And, Ed, one of the things that I think that you appreciate is we get to live the lives of so many other startups and so many other founders.
Yeah.
And so all throughout the day, I just sit with founders and talk through all these crazy issues that they're dealing with. I had lunch with a great founder today, a couple hours ago, and he was talking about how he had just come off of an $800 million exit. This is like about a year and a half ago.
Okay.
He went out to go raise money. He raised $10 million for this new business that he's doing that's absolutely taking off. And he was like, it was way harder than you would have thought. For a
Oh,
person
yeah.
who just, raised 50 million, gave back 800 million, he's like, this is usually the part. He wasn't being arrogant. He was just being honest. He's like, this is usually the part where people just throw money at you. And he's like, I did everything I could to get to 10 million raised, which for those of you that aren't familiar, if you just returned $800 million back 5 minutes ago, usually people are pretty excited to give you more money. Right. So even he was struggling with this current environment. But I say that to say I get the opportunity and the privilege to be able to see through so many pairs of eyes where the market is and who's doing what and what's working, what's not working. And then Ed, we get to sit in a venue like this and then share it with everybody so everybody can see what the whole market's doing.
That is what we're here for. And well, 31 years, I got to say, you look great. Wrinkles are probably on the inside. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. It's
Yeah, thank you.
fantastic.
Thank you.
And that brings us a good segue to what we're going to be talking about today. Will funding make me happy? What will?
Oh,
This is based on a very popular video that I recently had on my own channel, but it's actually a compilation based on all the questions that we get asked by founders as they explore, pontificate, struggle with funding, what that means. And I just want to encourage everybody, use the Q&A box or chat through this to interact with us. We want to prioritize what's going on. And then, Will, as always, I'd be remiss if I didn't say Startups.com is brought to you by us here at Startups.com. Great URL. Check it out. For those of you who are not familiar with us, we have a lot of free resources that you can go view here on the website. And not only that, we have a fantastic community. We got many of the members that are joining us right now that are live. And we do all the activities that Will just talked about. We sit around, we have to talk to you. We are very approachable. I don't think we have to go deeper into that. Will, what are some other things that you just want everybody to understand about startups.com?
Ed, did I ever tell you what it took for us to get the domain startups.com?
This is legendary. I didn't hear, actually. I've been curious.
Yeah, so real quick, when we used to be startups.co, okay, which is actually, even that was a hard domain to get. Like, this is like years and years ago. But startups.com was always the domain I wanted. And there was a guy that owned it. And this is the funniest thing. We bought a company years ago called KillerStartups.com, okay? And we bought that company, and the owner, his name goes by Gonzo. It's Gonzuela. Gonzo and I had known each other for like 20 years. And so I said, Gonzo, didn't you guys also own startups.com? Like that company, the brand? He's like, yeah, we did. I was like, can I get that in this transaction? And he's like, yeah, it's a problem. He said, when we split up the company, Killer Startups, we split it into two halves. One was Killer Startups, the actual operating company that was making millions of dollars at the time. And the other was just the domain. I took the operating company and my business partner took the domain. And I'm like, well, can we make this work like in some kind of deal? He's like, you're going to have to meet my business partner. Right. So he introduced me to the business partner. And this guy was a wild man, right? A wild man. And I'm trying to get him to sell me this domain. And he will not do it. I mean, he will for some extraordinary price.
Sure.
And so, Ed, the lengths I went through, it took me like 5 years to negotiate this, right? You want to talk about tenacity? I went so far as to, he listed it with a domain broker at one point. I flew to Florida, met this domain broker 2 hours away from the airport at some bizarre podunk location in this bar with no AC to try to negotiate through the domain broker to buy this thing. And he still wouldn't do it. I mean, I went to ends of the universe to buy this. Eventually, one day, out of the clear blue, I get a message from the owner. And he's like, hey, I've seen what all the stuff you've been doing with the brand and Startups.co. I think we should talk. I made him an offer. I'll never forget this, through Facebook Messenger on my phone while I was driving somewhere, and he agreed to it. And I was like, I mean, I can't begin to tell you how many conversations it took to get here. But if you want something bad enough, you don't let it go. And so that's why we have that domain.
Not to get into the nitty gritty, but I'm guessing that the ROI has been pretty good.
Best decision I ever made. I could have bought a house with the money, but this was much better.
Remember those days, the wild, wild west of domain squatting and all those things? Man, the internet has changed, Will. It has really changed.
It has.
Will funding make me happy? Here's a conversation. And hey, founders in the audience, I see you. You are raising money. And quite frankly, I'll just be very transparent. Well, I want to have this conversation with every founder because the questions we get asked and sort of the misconceptions and the beliefs, the values, I think deserve a little bit of vetting. We should talk about it. So remember, use the Q&A box or chat to ask questions. Well, Will, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you some statements, some questions, and then I'm going to give you some of the responses I've gotten, the conversation. And I'd love to hear your thoughts because, well, you have been around. Let's just call it what it is. That's the reason I asked you to give me your long history. And if I came to these conclusions based on, and I said it took me 25 years to learn to accept some of these truths, I can only just imagine how much you've thought through it.
And lived through it.
Exactly. So let's do the first one. Okay, so how funding changes your what, how, why. And well, I brought this up because I see funding, and when you bring on an investor, changes what you do, how you do, and really affects why you do it. And then founders are super excited about what they do and how they do it. But then when their why changes, their how starts to change. So things start to get a little janky from there. And so remember that I had a comment said, depends what you want to do. But yeah, in a lot of cases, it's useless. We made millions in revenues without any funding whatsoever. Now, that's a very privileged position to be in. Getting funding means you are less likely to try to be actually profitable. I thought that was a curious statement. And once that funding dries up, you are going to scramble to try and be profitable, which will fail a lot of times. And hence your why has changed. So back to this, changing the what, how, why. I'm curious. What are your thoughts here?
I think the first thing it changes is your focus. I think this goes so overlooked, but cannot be overstated. All of a sudden, your customer, Ed, goes from being the person who pays you, like the actual customer, what you think of your customer, and your customer becomes the investor. Let me pause on that for a second. In both cases, they're a revenue source that pays for all the stuff that you need. Okay. They pay for your staff. They pay for your marketing. They pay for your existence. Okay. And when you become a fundraising person, your customer becomes the VC. Your customer becomes the investor. Your job is to create a marketing pitch in the future for that investor. And all of a sudden, payroll is dependent not on the rest of the market, which you should be focused on, but on that investor, because they're the ones that are giving you the near-term money, which kind of that person suggested in that post. They're the ones that are now funding your company. Whereas when you're just working with customers, like we do at Startups.com, your customers pay your bills. The challenge is because that investor is not just one person, it's a number of investors, but when that investor becomes your single source of income, it becomes your single source of attention because you're constantly going back to them to appease them, which is exactly who you should not be focused on, but you have to.
And that attention eats up resources. And then if you don't get it, like I was talking with a group of founders, we were onboarding them, great founders coming in, like just bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, like totally full of life, right? And one of them made a statement and they said, Ed, I want to raise investors. And this is after they explained to me, they took out millions of dollars in loans and then paid back half of it in 6 months. Okay? That's pretty good. Well, all things considered. And then this founder told me, I want to raise an investor because money's getting expensive to, debt, et cetera. And I go, that's true. But hang on 2 seconds. Let's explore. PSA for all you founders out here, because the majority of them are raising money. I said, you may think debt seems more expensive on cash flow now, but you get an investor, that expense changes and could potentially be the most expensive money you are ever going to bring in, depending on how all that shakes out. And I just said, I'm not trying to deter you from getting an investor. I'm just letting you know, go in with both eyes wide open just so that you understand where the money comes from, changes the complexion of how you operate once you get that money.
Yeah, and like, how could it not, right? I mean, really, how could it not, right? From our standpoint as founders, we look at this as investors provide validation, right? Is my idea any good? If you give me money, then my idea must be good, and we seek that validation. I've been through it. I absolutely sought that validation. What we miss beyond that is, okay, once the money goes in, once I've gotten that validation, then what? Here's what we think happens, and versus what actually happens. What we think happens is we get this money, this big chunk of cash, so we can finally do all the things we've been wanting to do this entire time. We hire the people we need to, we make the marketing bets we need to, we build the product we need to. Like, all of that sounds awesome. And on top of that, we now get really smart people, these investors, who can help guide us through all of our growth. That's what we think is going to happen. And that is so appealing. Here's what actually happened. We get the check, just like people said. What we miss is, number one, we owe that money back, right? We're like, oh shit, kind of like, it's not that I didn't know that, but it's a lot different. If you've ever signed a mortgage, an auto lease, whatever, there is a moment from when you sign it to the moment you realize how much you actually owe. Like the first time it gets auto drafted out of your bank account and you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah. Buyer's remorse.
Buyer's remorse, right? And then what you realize is I now have a gun to my head. That gun to my head is my burn rate, burning through that money every single month, right? And I'm like, well, damn, like now I have all these people that I'm responsible for making sure that their payroll doesn't run dry. Gun to your head, right? Now I've got this whole new group of people that I never had 5 seconds ago, the investors, breathing down my neck about every decision I make. Gun to my head, right? Now I know in 18 months I'm going to have no money and maybe I can't pay my mortgage. Gun to your head, right? Like, that's the part that they don't tell you about going into it, but you find out pretty quickly. Like, that's the difference in what you think it is and what it is.
It plays on your psychology, and that's a good segue into the next question. So I ask this all the time. Why do founders think funding will make them happy? Because I literally see this sort of this desire, and they think, man, it is just going to be sunshine and rainbows after. As per this comment, get funded. I will be happy because I dedicate only my startup and no more to my second job as a chef. That day will come. It's common will. I see things like, then I'll be free. You said validation. I'll be happy with the validation. I'll finally be able to live out my potential. I'll get out of this grind that I'm living right now. The grass has to be greener on the other side. Well, why do founders fall into this trap? Let's just explore to acknowledge that this is a thing.
Of course it is. Look, it makes total sense. Here's what it comes down to. Here are a whole bunch of things that I don't have right now. I don't have cash. I don't have people. I don't have product. I don't have marketing. And on the other side of that, and I don't have the agency of my time because I'm, in this guy's case, working as a chef. When I get funding, all that goes away. Now I can focus just on the product. Now I can focus just on growing this thing, etc. And that sounds awesome. Of course, that sounds awesome. What you're missing is, wait a minute, what comes with that? Because that just sounds like all upside. Here's the perfect analogy I would use that I see all the time. It's for people who are single, right? And at the time, they're like, I'm so single right now, and I'm sad, I'm at home, I'm lonely, etc. And if I just found a spouse, let's say a husband, wife, what have you, I would be so much happier. And so they rush out and they get married. And then all of a sudden, they look back and they're like, I'm really unhappy. This person sucks. Like, I've got all these new responsibilities and arguments that I'm having all the time. I don't have my free time isn't my own. You name it. We basically, we're looking at any time, Ed, is what we don't have. What we never factor is what's on the other side when we get it. And I think that's what throws people off. What do you think?
And I want to add, I completely agree. And as always, we go into like relationship territory. We give a lot of life coaching advice here.
We do.
I want to add that we are not saying don't go get funding. We are absolutely not saying that. Certain startups, and I'm sure we'll touch on this, require funding, and it's just part of that. I don't poo-poo the entire funding vehicle. I think it's a necessary part of the startup ecosystem if you want to truly do these unicorns that we're starting to see, and that's fantastic. We are talking about preparing you for the psychology of funding and blowing those sacred cows out of the water and saying, hey, let's just really address this and get you prepared, because that's what we do here at Startups.com.
Yeah, and what we're saying is, and we're not saying don't do it, we're saying know what you're getting into.
Yeah.
Right? Because like when people are saying funding will make me happy, they specifically only talk about that one half of it. They only talk about the benefit. They don't talk about the cost. And usually that's because at the time, benefit is the only thing that's in front of them. It's almost like you had to have taken on the money to understand what the cost actually is. But let me tell you, talking to countless founders who are on the other side of it, where they have taken the money, all they talk about is the cost. They never talk about the benefit. They're like, I'll never do this again. And there's a reason.
Absolutely. We have a question in the chat. I'm going to get to that in just a moment. So thank you for asking that. I want to bring up one more comment that I think is kind of dangerous. And you've already touched on this, Will. The comment that I got, it's more of the I don't want any funding, but I do want to pay the bills. Exactly. There's a balance. So a lot of founders, they feel the pain and the pressure of paying their bills and they're running out of their personal runway as they're building. And they go, if I can get an investor, that will pay my bills. So it is that income source.
Yeah.
And while it's true, it's a really delicate balance that has to be, put into it, because you start relying on that, you basically live for funding. And like you said, changes everything that you do.
It does. And look, I think the reason everybody thinks that they need to find an investor is because everyone understands they don't have money, right? It's so black and white. I want to do this thing. This thing requires money. I don't have it. So I need an investor, which it makes total sense. Like, it makes total sense that you'd feel that way. How could you not? But bear in mind, only a very tiny percentage of companies that get launched, that actually go somewhere, also do it with investors. I think that's the part that a lot of people don't quite understand, is they're like, well, unless I get an investor, I can't start a business. I've started 9 companies. Only 3 of them have had investors, right? I bootstrapped the other ones. I bootstrapped Startups.com, right? Like, you can build a company without getting investors. Incidentally, probably some of the biggest successes I've had have not involved investors.
I was about to bring that up. The most successful exit that I've had, SaaS company, I bootstrapped. I got a very generous angel check for $10K from a close friend that just wanted to help me out. But I bootstrapped, I sold. It's still the crown jewel in my whole portfolio. Still pays me money, actually, even after the exit. And it was bootstrapped. So we're going to talk about those alternatives. Let's answer a question. Thank you very much, chat, for asking that. How does raising capital to sell products or services shift? Your intentions are primarily on licensing your IP as well as building other sales channels.
I don't think it shifts at all. I mean, whether you're building product and that's your revenue stream, or whether you're licensing and that's your revenue stream, it's still the same thing. You're still building up some sort of asset, which is then going to generate revenue. And that's just a different way of doing it. Now, maybe if what you said was, I actually don't need any capital because I'm just in the licensing business and I have nothing capital intensive. There won't be a lot of people. Yeah, I've already got the IP, et cetera. And really, I just need a couple people to help me with sales channels. In that case, I mean, you might be looking at a loan, or you might be looking at just like an individual one-off investor, like throwing in a little bit of extra cash, or in some cases, a co-founder that pick up some of the work as well.
Yeah, I have stories where, as you bring up loans, like these alternative non-dilutive forms, where the founder went out and tried to raise money, didn't get it, and then they just took out a loan and managed the cash flow, and then they don't need investors later on.
Right.
But I would say one of the potential nuances here, Will, not sure what you think, but I think maybe the investor changes. If you're raising capital and an investor has a thesis on, I just want to sell hard goods, products, or services, and then you might have an investor that really understands selling IP and through different sales channels. It just changes the investors that you're going to talk to.
Yeah, one of our other episodes we recorded, I think, a couple days ago, and I was talking about Priceline. A buddy of mine worked with the founder of Priceline. This is before Priceline. And all he did was IP licensing. I thought it was one of those fascinating businesses. It was called Walker Digital. The founder was Jay Walker, the founder of Priceline. And Jay made all his money. I think these things are fascinating when you hear about people's stories. Back in the day, Ed, when you used to have to pay your bills and you had an envelope, and the return envelope where you'd send your check in, when you closed the envelope, there was an ad on the back of it for some other service. He patented that, made $50 million on the patent for that. Right? Unbelievable. And so he built up Walker Digital as this giant patent office where he had a bunch of people in one room inventing stuff and a bunch of patent people in the other room patenting it, and then a bunch of lawyers in the other room suing everybody for violating their patents. It was like the ultimate patent troll, and they made billions of dollars doing this. It was unreal. So when we're talking about licensing and IP, I think about who would have invested in Jay Walker's business, who understands licensing IP and IP protection extraordinarily well.
You sparked my own story. I'm going to date myself. Back in the day, you remember, did you ever use America Online?
Yeah.
Yeah, right? And, they're distributing those CDs, and then it became really big, and they got big enough to buy Time Warner.
That was one of the most bizarre deals of all time.
Okay. I was kind of part of that deal because I worked with a guy inside Time Warner. So it became AOL Time Warner.
Yep.
And he came up with this idea, and he said, you know what? We're sick and tired of trying to sell physical media like records and albums and tapes, like cassette tapes. That was, it back then, going into CDs. And he said, we got this new idea. We're going to license and sell our catalog music to video games. And everybody in Time Warner said, that's the stupidest thing we've ever heard. How's that ever going to work?
I love that setup. Yeah.
And we worked our tails off. We were the only profitable division inside AOL Time
I love
Warner.
that. I love that. What a bizarre transaction that was. I remember at the time, people in Time Warner were like, "What the hell is going on right now? AOL is buying us? Like what kind of netherworld have we entered?"
Well, and it just goes to show that bubble burst and that deal was undone
Yep.
very quickly. They
I
backed
do
that
remember
out.
that too. Yep,
I was
yep,
part of
back it
that
up.
as well. I lost a
Nice,
lot of
nice.
work, let me just say. But let's talk then, Will, about where does happiness come from?
All
And
right.
this is something that I believe that you are uniquely qualified to answer, having, taken a kick at the can multiple times and
Yep.
successfully so. Here's a comment, and you touched on this before. It said, once in my early 20s, it was all about external achievements, getting to YC, raising funding, product hunt awards, etc., to fight the imposter syndrome. As I get older, late 20s, early 30s, I'm starting to grow the confidence to question if those things are right, because to be spending time on and focusing instead the fundamentals, talking to people, building the product service, unit economics. And I replied, keep going, you're going to be crushing it in your 40s, right? And I think that happened to me as well. And I want to touch on, like, Will, I hate to kind of revel, but it's kind of fun because I know when YC has closed their batch and sent out the rejections, because my social media gets flooded with, I got rejected from YC, FUYC, all that stuff. Like, I didn't get into YC. Now I'm lost. I wish YC would give me feedback. Why can't YC do this? And it's like all of a sudden, all these people are alienated from their lives because they were expecting that validation that came from YC. Well, what are your thoughts on where does happiness really come from?
It's funny. Like it never comes from where you think it's going to come from. The idea is this. The idea is that I'm going to start something and build something, and then at some point it'll be clear and evident between me and all the people in my life that I am successful now. I've crossed this threshold, and I am successful. My confidence comes out. My life becomes better. My days go better, and all of these things happen. And what's funny is I would love to meet the person that actually happened to. Because I know an awful lot of founders, thousands and thousands. I probably got them. Think of my phone right now. Probably the phone numbers of 10,000 founders in my phone, and I can't think of one that I can call and ask them how that worked out for them. Like knowing that it did. And I'm not saying it can't happen. I'm saying this idea that there's this like sea change of a person inside you that happens when you build a successful startup. That's not what I see. Having built successful startups and having done exponentially better than I had ever thought I'd do in my life, which had a lot to do with my expectations being very low going into this, right?
That's the secret.
Yeah, cross the bar, set it low. But I look at it and I'm like, the thing that I'm most thankful or proud of, etc., is my freedom. Just I get to wake up in the morning and do whatever the hell I want. Now, when I say that, I have a million responsibilities, right? And Ed,
Sure.
you would know this. I work harder than, like, yesterday you saw me at 7 a.m. plowing gravel in a Bobcat on a job site in 25-degree weather, right? Like, I'm not afraid of work. My point though is it's that freedom that was the most important thing to me. And what was crazy about it, I earned that freedom 30 years ago when I first started my company. Like, I didn't realize how valuable it was until later on. I had some cash to go with it, but the cash wasn't really it. Like 90% of the value of being a founder and doing what I've done was realizing that I could wake up in the morning and do whatever the hell I wanted, even if that thing wound up being a failure. I'm fine with failure so long as it's my failure. And I think that freedom has always been the most important thing to me and what I look to unlock with other people.
I prioritize autonomy myself. In fact, I've turned down large gobs of money. In fact, one time, it's an interesting story. So I sold my first startup to a company, family office, and then they went on a buying spree and they bought all these companies and consolidated us in Miami, built an entire new office, warehouse, like acid stained, everything. Like, it was gorgeous. We did it for, I believe, 2 years, and it tanked for various reasons. I was running a little department and I had a board meeting, and I said, I take responsibility. I zigged when I should have zagged, made some mistakes. I'm going to just say I ran the department into the ground. Let's put a fork in it. But I have a plan, and here's how you're going to get back your assets and your value and all these things. Here's how we unwind it. And they accepted the plan. They're very thankful. And the one guy came to my office, and I'll never forget this, Will. He said to me, we'd like to fund you $100 million to build the Latin Yahoo, right?
Oh, wow.
Because that's when Yahoo was like, crushing it. Again, dating myself, I'm old, right? That's when Yahoo was a thing. The Yahoo, those commercials, right? And I said, no, thanks. And I said, did you just hear what I said in the boardroom? I just said, I've been a big fat failure.
Yeah.
And he said, that's why we trust you more and we know what happened. And I said, I've been away from my family. I really missed my family. I didn't leave on good terms. And I said, I just want to go back there And what was great was I was able to just get a job at another startup that allowed me to just work from home and have that sort of comfort. And I could just kind of live off of my exit. But that autonomy, well, man, I wouldn't have traded that for anything back in the day.
I got to say, like, if I look at Startups.com, which where I think people that work here, almost all of them are founders themselves, like value the most is the autonomy.
Yes.
Right?
Oh,
Because,
yeah. We are grateful, Will, that you value autonomy because you allow us to value our autonomy. And that's a great part about the culture of startup founders and startups.
And again, it's because nearly, I'm trying to go through my list of everybody in the company, but like nearly everybody's at least been a founder once, if not multiple times. And because of that, I'm like, I'm in a room full of founders. I don't need to tell anybody anything, right? Like, I'll make sure, like, my job is to make sure we all keep running in the same direction. But short of that, like, you want to look for people that have that level of autonomy. And again, it's that freedom, right? That freedom to wake up in the morning and say, I can do whatever I want. Now, saying I can do whatever I want isn't the same as saying I have nothing to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Like, I have no responsibilities. That's not that. Like, when I wake up in the morning, I have 900 responsibilities, but I put those responsibilities there.
Exactly.
Right? They didn't get foisted upon me in some weird way. And it's funny about, like, my day to day or just my job. And a lot of people say, so what do you do? And I'm like, I'll be honest, like, I have no idea how my day is going to go at any given time because just weird shit happens all day long, right? Where I'm like, oh, I guess I'm doing that now. Like, I get pulled in a million directions.
Okay, but hang on. You bring up something else that brings me absolute joy. I'm curious what you think. One of the things that makes me the happiest about startups is the pursuit of the startup. I love getting customer feedback, trying a new iteration of an MVP, testing an assumption. When it works, and my team were like, it works. Look at the metrics, look at the numbers going up. Man, that gives me such excitement. And it correlates to what we're talking about with investors, because I find, well, that investors take the shine off of that because I got that shadow looming over me. But when I have the freedom to try and solve a customer's problem and get obsessed with that and that alone, I really am happy with my daily life.
I agree. And I think part of that is like, you want to be able to enjoy that customer win or how you spend time, et cetera, for what it is, for the win, not for how it will check a box for somebody else, right? Like, a good example is this recording. We're on YouTube right now. We're building content on YouTube like everybody is, and we're building a channel. And at some level, somebody will probably see this video and maybe want to go to Startups.com. And there's commercial value to us in that. Sure, great. But that's really not why I'm doing it. I'm doing it because I get to bullshit with my friend all day and talk about startups, right? And it's like, if I had to go to an investment community and justify that, it would suck, right? Like, I wouldn't want to do it. But the fact that I don't, and this goes back to the freedom, the fact that we can do it just because we enjoy doing it is the greatest benefit of all time in my mind, as far as what makes me happy.
Let's take a little side quest here. Well, we got a comment here saying, flying solo since launch, is it advantageous to find a co-founder? I understand they need to be a great fit. So we're taking for granted, we got to make sure right co-founder. But I'm curious as to how a co-founder contributes to the happiness, or is it necessary? What are your thoughts on getting a co-founder after you've launched?
Ed, we keep making these parallels to, like, getting married, because I these things are so close, right? Because you're finding someone that you're going to share a very specific, like, intense moment of your life with lots of consequence to it, and trying to find that right match. And I think it's safe to say that people spend far less time vetting their co-founders than they do going out on multiple dates over many years and dating people and finally getting married. What I tend to find is that, yes, just like a marriage, you can find a partner that adds value, that you really enjoy working with and makes the journey so much better. But kind of like getting married, I tend to see a lot more divorces than I see happy marriages. And it's nobody's fault. It's because this shit's hard, right? Especially with a co-founder where you're getting into something that is very difficult and statistically highly likely to fail.
Yes, all around the chips are stacked against you. But Will, here's something interesting with investors. So I see a lot of founders say, I need to go get a co-founder because investors don't invest in solo founders. And I just want to validate, yes, some investors do believe, like, if you have a technical team, the team needs to have a technical founder and somebody else, because building startups is fundamentally really hard. It's a team sport. And most of the really big startups that you see fall into, like, 2-3 co-founders. Yes, we have data behind that. Not going to argue. Well, at the same time, I see a lot of solo founders, and they basically hire really great employees and share. They don't raise money. They don't have that pressure, and they're just as good. I've seen that.
Yeah, I think that you get into a dangerous bias when you start looking at, like, highly specific data. Like, in other words, if you say the number of venture funded outcomes that had a solo founder versus a co-founder, cool. There aren't that many venture funded outcomes. I mean, like, Your data set is so incredibly small. So like think about that for a second. At any given time, there's about 10,000 active VC funded companies. Okay. And so, let's say you're pulling from that data set and then, of course, past VC funded companies. And you, in your data overwhelmingly says that companies with co founders do better. Awesome. That's 10,000 companies. What about the millions upon millions upon millions of other companies that get started? How did they fare? Right? Like, again, it may be the case that if you're specifically pursuing a venture outcome, that a co-founder is better. That doesn't necessarily mean it's better for everyone. And I'm not even sure it's better for venture funded outcomes. So I always get anxious when people present like data around it to say, yeah, that fits for that use case. Doesn't mean it's universal.
Let's put a button in this co-founder thing. I think if I had to summarize, yes, possible to get a great co-founder. Great co-founders are amazing. The good co-founders are worth their weight in gold, but not necessary. Don't push it. Don't like shoehorn a co-founder in for any other reason.
Never work with a co-founder that you wouldn't otherwise call an employee. Ed, you're a newly minted founder and you're looking for me as a co-founder. The question would be, if you had $200,000 to otherwise pay me, would you give me half your company? And if you're like, no, I would just pay you, then they're not a good co-founder.
That's a good one. Really great way to think about it. And just want to acknowledge, hey, you in the audience, I see a lot of solo founders right there. Keep at it. Don't get distracted. We're here to help you. In fact, Will, I would consider myself sort of a fractional co-founder to like 600 startups.
Yep. It's the coolest thing. And I'm proud of that fact. I love to sit in and kind of like become part of their journey. And a lot of times when you're talking to me about your startup, I'll immediately start using the terminology we. I was like, here's what we have to do. Here's what we have to do. And I do that because I'm trying to demonstrate that I'm thinking like as if I'm your co-founder, right? I'm on your side of the table. I'm thinking as what we need to do. And I have ownership in the outcome.
Right on. Great comment came in from this founder. Awesome. Staying single, but ready to mingle, right? That's a good position.
I love it. I love it.
All right. So then, Will, the thing is that funding is not the end game or the beginning. A lot of founders make this mistake and say, I can't get started until I get funding, or funding, then everything, they don't think past it. And you've touched on this. Look at some of these comments. Without funding or already being rich, you're just working by yourself. There's only so much you can get done. Unless you are a grifter, you're the kind of convinced people work for free. This is one of the more cynical comments, but I bring it up, Will, because I see it a lot. Right? Also, here's another side to it. If we didn't raise funding, our company would have been much more successful and the founding team would have retired. There's so many factors, but the number one question is always, are you cash flow positive? This yes or no answer separates you from the other 95% of startups. The answer is yes. There's very little reason to say yes to funding. I thought that was an interesting story.
Yeah, I think the idea that you don't have funding, there's just no way to do it, and you're a grifter if you don't. I've got to wonder to myself what kind of grifter Bill Gates was when he brought on Steve Ballmer for free. Because Steve Ballmer, I think, is like one of the top 20 richest people in the world.
Oh, yeah. He's loving life right now.
He got so grifted. It's amazing. I understand, on the internet, you get the most cynical people ever. And I always think it's hilarious that some of the most cynical people are also the least accomplished. When I tend to find like a correlation there. You get people like on Reddit, for example, that are like, oh, that'll never work. And I'm not this kind of person, but I always wonder myself, and you're an authority on that, how? Exactly. Like I've been doing this for 30 years and I don't know the answer to that. How the hell do you? And so I think for a lot of people, when they're staring down the barrel of the gun that is funding, I think part of the thing that you have to do is realize that funding, more than anything, just buys you time, right? Time to work on the problem. A lot of times people will get into their startup, their idea, and they'll start working on it. And then as they're going through it, they're not able to raise funding. Ed, you've seen this. But the time that they spent keep moving the startup forward made it so they didn't need funding, right? Which I always think is so fascinating because a lot of it is just, you just need to be around long enough to get some of this stuff done.
I had a conversation with a founder and now they just raised $250,000. So we're just going to acknowledge that they couldn't get funding for the first version of their product. They just couldn't figure out why, but it was because the market wasn't cooperating with them. They thought they had the greatest idea. People were willing to pay for it. So no product market fit. So investors, rightfully so, said, yeah, we're not interested right now. So they kept iterating and they used that time and they just lived on ramen noodles and all this thing. Finally, they came to an idea and they were talking to an investor. And let me tell you, if I would have named this investor, I got to keep it confidential. Everybody would recognize if you're in anything to do with Wall Street, like financial circles, everything like that. Yeah. He's talking to me and he says, yeah, so we got so-and-so as the investor because he said, if you could build this is how I change the company. And they gave him a demo the next day. And he was like, okay, I need to see more. And then after, I think 6 weeks, still took time, he invested. And he said, yeah, we're in his offices right now. We work out of his, big building. And I totally fanboyed out. I was like, no way. You have him as your investor on your cap table. But if they didn't struggle, if they weren't forced in that crucible to refine their idea, they wouldn't have
Yeah.
got to this place where there's so much more blue sky right now.
No, it's incredible. And, I look at it too, where I'm like, getting that check absolutely makes sense. Now, again, you don't have money and you're like, I need money in order to get to the next step. I get it. I've done it, right? I've raised venture for my last 3 companies and I had the same notion. So I understood it. What I got a chance to like compare and contrast to is there are some cases where if you don't raise capital, there's actually no chance that you'll ever go anywhere. Because to your point earlier, Ed, some businesses actually just need a voluminous amount of cash. You're likely not going to bootstrap Uber. There are some concepts that need just lots and lots of cash, and there's a 99% chance your idea is not one of them. Right? Just because you need cash, just because you don't have cash, doesn't mean you have to have cash to build this business the way other venture funded companies do. That said, last year, maybe it was the year before, I'm in one of my founder dinners. Okay, these are 8 founders, and we get together once a quarter. We've either raised or grown companies to about $8 billion, okay, among us. All of us have raised money. Some of them have raised, over $1 billion, et cetera. And we talked about if we had to do it over again, would we do it the same way or would we raise the money? Every single one of them, like unprompted, meaning these are very strongly opinionated folks, were like, I would never do it again. Think about that. These are the most successful people who have raised, right? At billion plus levels. They're like, never again. And again, this isn't, we always joke, this isn't a campaign against fundraising. This is a campaign of understanding what fundraising really is. So when you make that decision, and we'll be happy to walk you through it, you know what you're getting into. That's all.
I've had founders struggle with funding and then they say, I have to build my version 1 like this, which is an all-encompassing, because that's how you have to enter in the market.
Yep.
And then they go, you know what? We can't do it. So we're just going to switch to services.
Yep.
And we're going to just try and automate services. And they start making money. And then they realize, they go, I didn't really need all that money to build something that's going to make me money and be a sustainable business. And then they slowly start building what they originally intended, but they have so much more data. They have an understanding what the market is, and they have a built-in customer base. I've seen that happen here at Startups.com. It's absolutely amazing.
We're about to enter, Ed, our 14th year of business in May. We're just now, and I know because you're a part of this, we're just now building our most exciting product that we've ever built. 14 years later, right?
Yeah.
And look, we've built a lot of stuff. We bought companies, we've sold companies. We've done a lot of stuff in 14 years, 13 years. Right now, I think it's our peak.
I think so as well. And how much more confidence do we have, Will, because we spent those 14 years? You spent those 14 years. I've only been here for a bunch of those. But knowing what we know now, it's not only exciting, but the confidence to know what the market is going to accept is fantastic. So great stories. I take particular pride in saying that we're bootstrapped, Will, which is great. So here's the danger of funding obsession. And I'm not talking about, listen, we got members in our audience that are approaching funding in a very healthy, measured way. Please continue to do so. But we meet a lot of founders that are obsessed with funding. And this is one of those cognitive biases where people don't know they're obsessed with funding until it's kind of like hits them in the face. But here, we've got a comment here. For me, funding is the necessary bad thing all startups have to chase at some point and need to deal with. And unfortunately, that is an essential asset of optimal growth. And this is a very prevailing thought, Will. Let's talk about in this last moment, like what are the alternatives as you pursue funding? How should founders think of maybe looking at the other side of this?
Here's how I build companies. Ed, if you and I were to start any new company tomorrow, I don't even care what the company is, unless, of course, like I said, it was hard coded to, it was just capital intensive. I'll give you an example. I started a company mid 2000s called Affordit.com, which doesn't exist anymore. It's essentially what Affirm is now. And in order for that to work, we were buying products for people. Basically, like they wanted to buy an Xbox, we'd sell it to them for $20 a week. We had to pay for the full Xbox, which back then was $400, in order for them to start paying us back $20 a week. Well, that was going to require hundreds of millions of dollars of cash to be sitting in the bank to be able to fork over to make those purchases, to extend that credit, essentially. Yeah, no way you're going to bootstrap that, okay? Now, technically, you could have in a smaller way, but we didn't. My point is, there are very few businesses where there is no choice whatsoever. And if you and I were starting something new today, the first thing I would say is, what version of the business do we need to be building right now that we can get out the door that can generate revenue? And it might look dramatically different than what we'll eventually build. But who cares? All that matters right now is how do we generate some dough, and we would evolve it from there. I think a lot of people don't realize you can do that.
Yes, it may be a different product. It might even be a tangential product. It might be something that is of value for your target market that your market, your customers are willing to pay for. Case in point, you know how my playbook over the last few years in terms, which has got me pretty far, is I go and I consult. So I do a service, make money. Then I put everything that I've learned proprietary into a book. I sell the book and then I try and go on mass, and then I try and deliver whatever's in the book in some software form, a little bit at a time,
Right.
based on sales, how people are responding, what people ask for, etc. Now, it's slower growing, but at the same time, well, I'm kind of done picking industries where I'm like, oh, I need to burn $1 million to build this and get out there fast because everybody else is building the same thing. Like
Which
AI,
never
I'm
happens.
so done with anything AI right now. Problems that AI is going to create, and future things that use AI as a tool, but trying to compete in AI. And these are decisions that I have the luxury to make. But at the same time, Will, I think a lot of founders could gain some value in stopping and thinking about, hey, what am I trying to build as version one, my MVP, and
Yeah.
how could I explore different revenue opportunities before I have to do that?
Right. Yeah, I agree. When we started Startups.com, it didn't start as Startups.com. I mean, you learned in this episode that the episode alone, or I would say the domain alone took time. We started as Fundable.com. We were a crowdfunding platform. And what we learned as we were trying to build that platform was that all of our customers that were trying to get on the platform to raise money didn't have a pitch deck. We actually started pitch deck consulting. And that's actually what drove more revenue long before we ever got into building Fundable to actually become a SaaS product. So there's lots of ways to service our customer. They don't have to be with exactly what this product is. Ed, if you and I were going to come out with a great new cookie, for example, right? And like we have to have manufacturing facilities, we have to have inventory and all this stuff. I'd be like, yeah, we do. But right now, let's go to tailgates and sell them, at football games, or let's go to, cocktail parties and do parties around them, things like that. Like, let's find out what we can do on a guerrilla basis to kind of just get some dollars going so we can spin that up into the bigger picture.
Yeah, let's expand on that. Let's say, let's try farmers markets, or let's try
Absolutely.
different, home parties. At the same time, you could adjust it. And there's a reason I'm now obsessing over cookies. I'm kind of hungry. But I would say, Will, maybe our margins, we're not going to be able to do cookies on mass. Let's see how we can charge like $10 a cookie and get
Yep.
to an upscale market and we've got a different type of brand, or the cookies
Yep.
represent something different, and
Yep.
get the feedback from there. There's so many ways you can do it. And that's my challenge to all of you founders out there, Startups.com, those watching on the internet here with us live. Do yourself a favor. And I'm curious, I'm going to ask you this question, Will. Do yourself a favor, do the exercise. Just stop for a moment and say, let's say funding was not an option. It is plan B. What would my plan A be if I had to take funding out of the equation? And give yourself the opportunity to explore that, work with us, and you might be surprised, or you might have more conviction. Hey, I need to stay the course. Will, how would you approach that?
I would say we always say that funding is plan B. Funding is what we do because it may not happen. Like, we can't control for that. Plan A can't be something that might not happen, right? Plan A needs to be, what do we have control of? We have control over how we spend our time, what kind of product we put together, how we pursue revenue right now, which, as we said just a moment ago, isn't always necessarily the exact product that we want to build. It's us doing pitch deck consulting because that makes hundreds of thousands of dollars, which will give us enough time to go build our actual platform, which ended up becoming Startups.com.
That's fantastic. Okay, so to summarize, everyone, we are again not saying don't pursue funding. Treat it as one of your options, one of your tools. Do yourself a favor. You owe it to yourself as fabulous founders out there, relentlessly resourceful founders, to look at all these other forms of funding, including revenue, non-dilutive. We're here to help you, and
Yep.
just understand what you're getting into and the impact funding will have on you as a founder, because we care about you as holistic individuals, not just another logo on our sheet saying, hey,
Right.
look at all the startups we helped and their valuation.
Right.
Other accelerators can do that.
Yep.
We care about you. And if you end up having just an amazing story where you realize, hey, I didn't need to go get funding from A16Z or Sequoia or Y Combinator,
Yeah.
and I'm just as happy and successful, we would take that as a victory. In fact, I'd probably celebrate that more. Will, what are your last words of encouragement? What should founders do from here?
All that matters is revenue. Funding is just a mechanism to revenue, and unfortunately, it's a detour to revenue. All that matters is revenue. What doesn't matter is how you get the revenue, right? If you're doing consulting on the side in order to keep the lights on, in order to build the product, that's revenue. You're already there, right? So everything we're talking about, how funding might make us happier, et cetera, remember, funding is a detour toward the goal. The goal is revenue. Whatever we can do right now to generate any kind of revenue puts us on the right path, which is why it's always path A. So we never lose sight of what the most important goal is.
As always, could have said it better myself. This brings us to the end. Hey, I want to make a request, maybe a challenge. I'm throwing down the gauntlet for everyone, Will. How about everybody who watches this, share this with someone that you know might be struggling with the entire funding thing, might be wallowing in despair because they're not raising capital. Help another founder out.
Yep.
It helps us out. We would appreciate it. Will, what's the last word from you?
The last word, it's just what I tell people all the time. Like, oh, you've been super helpful, Ed. I know you get this all the time. How can I be helpful? I say the same thing. Help another founder. Just push it forward. Help someone else. Okay, that's how it helps us, because our job is just to get this giant snowball that is entrepreneurship moving. And the way you can help as an entrepreneur yourself is inspire someone else to do the same.
We'll be back next week with more of your questions. Tune in Tuesdays. Will's going to be back. We're going to do pitch decks. Wednesdays, traction hacking, revenue acceleration with Ron Tanner, Chief Marketing Officer. That's it for us today. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you soon. Thanks, Will.
Thanks, friends. See you.